Well, good day, folks. How's things going for you today? I'm doing another of my presentations on The Secret by Byron Preiss. This was a book that was published in the early 80s. It was a treasure hunt book. It came out of the book packaging efforts of Byron Preiss, his association with some people from Lampoon Magazine, etc. Today, I am going to look at a couple of items about Byron Preiss. And the first is a document called The Strange Case of Byron Preiss Visual Publications. And this is basically a published open research from the University of Exeter. The author is P.G. Williams. It's in the Journal of American Studies, and it was first published in November of 2018. And in this, let's just say document, they talk about Byron Preiss visual publications and what it was and what book packaging is. And it gives some context as to what Byron Preiss was all about between the period of 1976 and 1979 when Byron operated a book packager that specialized in graphic novels, where he brought comic creators together on original stories and licensed properties and delivered a finished product to a publishing house. This is basically what the book publisher does. In this article, it talks a little bit about how Byron Preiss was not really accepted very well by either the comic book community or the adult novel community because he was a tweener. He's basically trying to turn comic book graphic novels, long form novels with visual images and illustrations into a new genre in the publishing industry. In other words, he was trying to make these comic books become a mainstream novel in which people would buy the comic that would actually be a book instead of just a magazine type of item. So Byron Carey, Cary Preiss. So Carey is his middle name, and so maybe as part of that tribute thing, they were using Valkyrie just as kind of a I don't know a nod, if you will, to Byron Preiss. But anyway, so his middle name is Cary, by the way. He was one of the most controversial figures in the U.S. comics in the second half of the 1970s. And that's because he produced 9 comics related books between 79 and 6 and 76 and 79. And these were mainly for adult readers, and they were, graphic novels, if you will. And one reader called him the greatest enemy that comics faced because of the way in which he was trying to turn the comic industry on its head. Mainly because he was viewed by the comic book community as a self-important Arabist. And so, anyway, while he claimed to be on the side of the people in the comic book business, he ended up more or less being a enemy of them because he took what the comic book creators wanted to put into a novel and edited it for his own interpretations. And he always became overly involved in editing of the people's actual story. Uh, so basically, a lot of the traditional comic people, shied away from Byron unless they really wanted to try to find a mainstream audience in a full length book or a novel of their ideas for a comic. And a few people indeed did take him up on these ideas over time, and there did become some, uh, let's say, published works from Byron Preiss as a book publisher. Um, and so, as you read this article, you'll find out about his relationship with Arrested Development. and Pisano, and you'll find about his relationship with a person that I think was recently mentioned on a show that Ben Eason was talking about. And so it goes through the history of Byron Preiss as a book packager in the early 70s and the process of book publishing. Um, and so in the 1970s, a distribution system emerged that saw comics sold through specialist shops, venues, and by fans of comics and related media. The growth of this direct market underscored what many stakeholders in North American comics would already know, and that fans would spend more money on comics than the average purchaser. And so it was well known that there was a fan base or a fandom that followed the comic book business. And this is what the publishers wanted to tap into. And so over time, that's basically how the idea of leveraging um, comic books into the mainstream came about as a packaging or a packaging type of idea. Uh, okay, so Byron Preiss was a graduate of the University of Pennsylvania and Stanford Graduate School of Communications. Um, he was an intern at DC Comics. And most people don't realize, or it's not widely discussed, the fact that Byron Preiss was actually an intern at DC Comics, and he proposed the paperback edition of The Green Lantern, co-starring Green Arrow. DC made Preiss the quote director of a comics education program called Edugraphics, and he collaborated with the creator James Steranko. Well, I think we've had his name dropped here now in another video just recently. So I thought I'd point out this whole thing of where it started, and that was with DC. And he, as an intern, being given the title director of Edugraphics. And so they put out a comic about drug addiction published in a tabloid form, and it was distributed to children in Philadelphia. He briefly wrote comics for other publications in the mid 1970s, such as National Lampoon. So National Lampoon serialized his comic strip, quote, 1 Year Affair, which was a 52-episode musing on modern dating etiquette. The strip, drawn by Ralph Reese, mined incongruous material, including alcoholism and miscarriage. Okay. To deliver a gag at the end of every installment. 1 Year Affair began in 1973, and by the time the strips were collaborated as a small landscape book in 76, Preiss had written two titles. Fiction illustrated series. The biography at the back of the 1 Year Affair book asserts that Preiss' adult graphic novels had been acclaimed as an important step forward for the comics medium. Okay. All right. So as you can see, we have Byron Preiss, A, as an intern at DC Comics, and B, as being a writer for National Lampoon magazine. Now, one of the things that Preiss like to do is that whereas a comic usually has a bubble, if you will, in the cell, and it has some dialogue, Preiss wanted to get rid of all the bubble dialogue and just give you a picture and then have a story that related to the picture. Oh, hold on. That sounds vaguely familiar to a book where you have a picture and text. So maybe what we really need in order to solve the secret is to have these little bubbles in each of the cells above, like the lion image, and maybe we should have a bubble above the witch, which is not really a witch, but maybe we need to have bubbles in these. I don't know. But anyway, as the lead purveyor of removing bubbles from comics, uh, he oftentimes found himself in, um, let's say, butting heads with the creative people of the comic strip world because he was an excess editor, an over editor, a book packager. He wanted to have his hands on so many projects so that he could earn a royalty. And so I think it didn't take long before the people in the comics industry realized what this guy was really up to. And that was he wanted to get his, instead of selling one project a year, he wanted to get a share of a bunch of projects. And so when it came around to the time of working with, um, Star Wars and getting involved in a project that was going to do an illustrated graphic novel, if you will, he started basically uh, taking over the project. And so about 1976, he kind of had uh, a falling out with Steranko and some other people. And one of the few comic critics to write about Byron Preiss's visual publications text was R.C. Harvey. And he argued that Steranko's Chandler, a 1976 publication, should not be considered a graphic novel because the pace of the story is controlled by the prose that runs in uniform columns under the pictures. While the pictures create the story mood, they add no new information to the story. In fact, Steranko told the fan press in 1977 his intentions was to move away from comics, exploit a quote new format in quote adult books. Uh, Nonetheless, Harvey's point was shared by a multitude of fans and creators who called the fiction illustrated books phony comics and criticized the series on the grounds it, quote, hardly qualifies as comics and that claiming them as such BPVP was going to, quote, set comics back 40 years. One fan snarled, when the adult graphic novel is produced, it won't be in this fashion. Byron Preiss Visual Publications became a byword amongst fans of transgressive word image combinations. And so, as you can see, he was starting to have a falling out with additional comics, and people were taking him to task over this. All right, so anyway, the Empire of Byron Preiss. So, Empire was this creation between Chaikin, Delaney, and Preiss. Star Wars, around the time Chaikin was enjoying the success of the Star Wars comic based on George Lucas's 1977 film, the license was awarded to Marvel without a fee, but Lucas had two stipulations: to maximize publicity, and that comic had to appear in the film's release, and the artist had to be Chaikin. So they rolled out this comic called Empire, and uh, it I don't know. I guess it was kind of a flop. It only sold like half of the first printing, and uh, they started to get fed up with Priest's meddling in the actual comic itself, and the fact that he changed text and dialogue and to make it to where something that was supposed to happen didn't actually happen. He made one mistake in which one character was to be in a location, but he replaced it with a different character, and they started to feel like that Priest had been imposing his quote ideas about how a plot achieves a certain kind of suspense, and as resistance grew to that, so did the his involvement in that as well. Um, and so, in summary, Preiss is basically the purveyor of the latest graphic novels, and it happened in a time where a group of people were trying to move out of the comic book mode and into the mainstream. And I don't know, this is an interesting read. Gives you some insight into book packaging, into Byron Preiss and his involvement in the comics industry, etc. So I was kind of enthralled by that because it was a public document. And then I always wondered, well, okay, so what actually happened to Byron Preiss Visual Publications? And so I came across another article that I wanted to give some information about. And this is in the archives of the Securities and Exchange Commission.gov. And if you just Google, I guess, Byron Preiss visual publications, you can come up with this article, and it's basically about Preiss Byron Multimedia Company Incorporated. So, and this document is dated sometime around. Okay, where is the date? Well, I'll get to the date. Anyway, it goes into the 90s. So this is sometime after the Byron Preiss Visual Publications business, that when he was running that company. And so by this time, he had formed a new company called Preiss Byron Multimedia Company, Inc. And it's incorporated at 24 West 25th Street in New York. And it was filed to the United States Securities and Exchange Commission in requirements for the company. And so it has the disclaimer here, and it tells you who the officers are. So in the company's name by now is called the Preiss Byron Multimedia Company, Inc. And the 46-year-old Byron is the chairman of the board, the chief executive officer, and the president and director. James R. Delomo is the chief financial officer, secretary, treasurer, and director. And Matthew Shapiro is a director. Jack Romanos is a director, and Roger Cooper is a director, and Neil Tomlin is the executive vice president. And at this time, it just says that Preiss is the founder of the company and has served as president and chairman of the board since July of 1992. In 1974, Preiss founded the Byron Preiss Visual Communications, and he served as the president and chief executive of that company as well. Delomo is the chief financial officer since 1994, and he's also served as the other position as well. So, moving forward in talking with about this, we find out some more information about this particular company. So at the time, the principal in 1997, the annual salary for the Byron was $350,000. In 1996, it was, $350,000. It was $396,000, and he made salary in 1995 was $224,317. He received a $100,000 compensation bonus, however, in '95, thereby bringing his, compensation up to $324,000. He didn't do any share exchanges in that particular year. He had also 200,000 shares that he could exercise in addition as well. Chose not to do that. So in April 1st of 1994, Preiss entered into an employment agreement with the company, which allowed him to be paid $350,000 in '97, and additional amounts as determined by the board of directors in 1998. He also received such additional compensation, including bonus and raises, which the board of directors shall exercise at their request. In the event that the employment agreement is terminated by the company upon Mr. Priest's death, his employment uh, shall be entitled to receive any accrued but unpaid base salaries of date of death. Plus, his Priest's immediately family members shall be entitled to continue to receive health insurance benefits for the balance of the term of the premiums. Uh, so the agreement also says that if Mr. Priest involuntarily terminates employment within 90 days subsequent to a change of control, uh, he shall receive a lump sum payment equal to one half the aggregate annual rate of compensation then being paid or to the benefit of Mr. Priest. Okay, and so there's an employment agreement here. They also, as an insurance policy, the loss of Mr. Priest's services could have a material adverse effect on the business of the company. The company has maintained two key man life insurance policies aggregating to $2.95 million to insure the life of Mr. Priest, of which the company is its beneficiary. I guess that's interesting. In the connection with the transactions contemplated by Dolphin stock purchase agreement, Mr. Gardner and Dolphin entered into an employment agreement dated 1997, quote, the Gardner employment agreement, for 3 terms subject to possibility. So it looks like the company had merged or bought out another company by the name of Dolphin. So they also have this in connection with the transaction contemplated by the merger of On-Ramp School Publications, Inc., and with and into Internet Education Group, Inc., IEG, and Neil Tomlin entered into an employment agreement dated. And so when they bought out, looks like they bought out On-Ramp and Internet Education Group, and they gave this guy a job at the company for 3 years, paid him like 157, 150, etc. So, so the following table sets out certain information on April 22nd of 1988 to the knowledge of the company. The owners of the company was the amount of shares that Byron had was 987,000. He owned 12.4% of the company. Viacom International actually owned 1.3 million shares of this company and held a 16.6% ownership. And Martin L. Berman Foundation owned 3%. And then there is a long list of other owners of this company. The shares are owned by Viacom International, subsidiary of Viacom, and they purchased the ownership in this at $7 per share. And so if you consider Byron's shares of 987,000, if you round that up to a million, you got a $7 million investment in this company. The ownership stake that Viacom had in the company had resulted from the fact that they sold for cash equities for over, how much was that? Okay. Well, I can't find it right now. But I think it was over like $6 million in cash, which the company got by selling that interest to Viacom. So Byron Preiss served as the president of CD-ROM. He had ownership in a bunch of CD rights, and he maintained through this agreement like a royalty for each of these for any of the material that Byron Preiss would eventually sell or license to his own company, his own other company, if you will. And his office, Byron Preiss Electronic Books, was subleasing his office space for $1,700 a week to the other entity. I don't know how the books got pretty much reported on that, but anyway, so he's subleasing out a part of the building to another one of his sub companies during this time. Okay, so in '95, the Viacom purchase was actually $5,964,000. It was paid in cash, which is how they ended up having a 12.6% share in this company. There was also a non-compete agreement that was entered into with Simon and Schuster, so that Simon and Schuster, a division of Viacom, couldn't compete with Byron Preiss, and that if should in the future they should do that, there would be a $375,000 punitive fee if it was shown that Simon and Schuster went ahead and competed with what Byron Preiss was doing. But Viacom really probably didn't care. They just wanted to have Simon and Schuster doing their thing and having these, Byron do his thing. In this deal, Pocket Books was created, and Simon and Schuster started distributing 12 to 24 books per year as part of this licensing agreement. And so by getting in with Viacom, they got some additional distribution channels, etc. So there's a little sneak peek into what's available on Byron Preiss and how much money he was making in the late 90s and how he was looked at in the comic book industry and where he started. And of course, in 2005, sadly, he perished in an automobile accident. And I don't specifically know if karma actually is involved here, but if you look at some of the puzzles and some of the solve ideas that are out there, some of the things that he writes about in the secret with the car accidents and the Patent Museum and how, or not Patent Museum, the Patent Museum and how he died in the car accident and how somebody died in the California freeway and exploding cars and all this. And you just kind of wonder if there's some serendipity in the world and that, all of this behavior ended up resulting in the ultimate of ironies. So I think this is probably my last video on Byron Preiss. I think it's my last video on The Secret. If you just look at this and look at what it is and how it came about and the hero worship we have for a guy that basically took advantage of the comics industry, was writing about stuff in National Lampoon magazine having to do with miscarriages, alcoholism, and the other sordid subjects. There seems to be a concerted effort to, recreate the image of this person in the year 2023. And so I'm just, I've had my fill of it. I listen to the people who fan worship this guy, some of his friends who try and make him out to be somebody he wasn't. And, it's disturbingly interesting when you look at these actual employment agreements, what he was up to, the way he was making money, the way he was grafting off of other companies. You come to the conclusion that, the people that think The Secret is such a great puzzle book and there's hero worship involved for the guy that put it together are going on a loosely distant bad adventure, because the facts speak for themselves on what was going on in the publishing industry, what Byron Preiss was to the comics industry. And I just think that one of these days people will realize what the book was all about and the treacherousness of it, the depravity of it, the slurs at the African American community, at the disabled community. And ultimately, there's a concerted effort to not show the depravity involved here from National Lampoon. because it's not politically correct today to have a boy, you know, of the Lemp family living in the top of a mansion and then go secret something in Cherokee Park under a swing set. People won't find that funny today if that one gets dug up. People didn't really think it was that funny when Chicago's train wreck, the one that caused the most deaths in history at the time, uh, is, a railless ending. And that you've got, Grant Park and, on down the line when the Central Illinois Railroad's trains ran into each other. And I don't think people specifically like the fact that you've got an African American cemetery next to the Old North Church that leads you to Andy Papulo and a scantily clad woman of the 1970s, where Papulo dies as a result of Mr. K being propositioned by a black prostitute. People just, this is the depravity. This is what he was up to. And people today just they want to look the other way when they realize that Rockefeller and the story of Propecia in the Rockefeller family and the story of how National Lampoon magazine wrote about the Rockefeller that got lost and eaten, or presumably eaten, by the Asmat tribe. And they put an image out there, a visual image depicting this. And as you look further into this, you find that they're making fun of Natalie Wood off Catalina Island being killed. They're making fun of the shirtwaist factory fire that happened at the turn of the century. It was one of the greatest causes of human death in New York City. When you go to look at California and the story of exploding cars on the interstate, and you find out that there was a bus. The Calcubus is a story about a bus that explodes, or doesn't explode, but goes off the highway and kills a bunch of kids. And so I don't know. I guess I'm just saying the 1982 publication of The Secret is something that keeps this guy's, I don't know, thing alive. And to the 25, 26 people that are diehard, promoters of this guy's work, and the maybe 100 to 200 people that are actually actively looking for a cask, I'm just saying, if you don't go in the world of Byron Preiss and learn about it and what it was and who he is, you're not going to find any of these, because that's who he was. That's who he was. So anyway, I'm going to say goodbye to this community. If you care to learn about any of this, just start watching the videos I did, the whole series of videos, which nobody was interested in commenting on. Nobody was interested in challenging my opinions, so they must be true, that I did on every single one of the people in the back of the book, taking this apart for you so you can understand what 1982 was, who the authors were, what they were aiming at. One of these days, when one of these is found, either in Cherokee Park in St. Louis, or maybe the one is found in New York next to the statue of the guy that was involved in the steel making and Bessemer steel process that led you back there. When you find the one in Dallas that has to do with JFK and the assassination of Kennedy, when you find that one, when you find the one that has to do with Catalina Island and Natalie Wood, and then the joke will be on you when you find the one in Celeron, New York, that's up there in Lucille Ball's hometown, Naismith's hometown, etc. And then when you find the one in Salt Lake City that has to do with the tragedy involving the Mormons and the fun that they make of the multiple lives of the Mormon community in 1982, you'll realize that maybe the stuff in the back of the book was important. I actually am now thinking that there's one about Prefontaine and the screwdriver, in Oregon. Eugene, Oregon. I now think there's one in Eugene, Oregon. And it has to do with the story of the crash of Steve Fontaine's car going down, down the hill after a party where he was, hoping to date or hook up, and alcohol was involved. And the irony of alcohol being involved in the dating situation, somebody dying in a car wreck, not lost on me whatsoever. Uh, General George S. Patton, the Patton Museum, the fact that you showed General Patton in the position in which he died, and eventually somebody will go to Fort Knox, they'll go to Keys Park, they'll go look at the little amphitheater there, and they'll find that there's a water fountain adjacent to that, and they'll look there and they'll say, wow, this is about the Patton Museum, and maybe I should really dig here. And then one of these days, when you're in Florida and you're researching the Orlando area and the Walt Disney connection and all the Walt Disney information in the back of the book, you might realize it's not about St. Augustine, but it's more about Walt Disney. It's about maybe Orlando. Some of the people he mentioned in the book, in the back of the book, have ties to Orlando, Florida. Steve Jobs. These people, Phil Knight, all of them are in the back of the book. Here's an example. So who is the small businessman? The small businessman? Well, the small businessman is Ross Perot. And Ross Perot's mortgage banker that led Ross Perot's public offering of EDS is a guy by the name of Populo. And so all you had to do was figure out, okay, the small businessman, who is that? Okay, that's Ross Perot. Well, what company is that? That's EDS. Oh, how did EDS? Who basically helped EDS become EDS? Not Andy Populo, but Populo did. And so the answers are all in the back of the book. Liberty, they're all in the back of the book. But anyway, all right, folks, I've had my fill. Thank you for joining in today. Hey, good to see you. Glad you come over. This is going to wrap it up for my involvement in The Secret. Hope everybody has a great life.